Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Komet and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hey, Scott.
How's it going, Jason?
It's all right weekend, kind of just, nice weather, kind of summerish and that sort of thing. And yeah, just a good weekend, even though I didn't catch any matches live this weekend.
I caught most of the Cavalry game live, but yeah, as usual, I ended up watching the Wild game after the fact. And yeah, do we ever have a lot to talk about tonight?
This is our recap episode where we talk about what happened over the weekend and results for Calgary-based teams. We got a lot to talk about, I would agree. We will talk about the Calgary Wild's match against Vancouver Rise, Cavalry FC playing York United, and then a whole bunch of post-secondary action, including the Crowchild Classic men's edition, Dinos and Cougars playing this weekend, and also SAIT and Ambrose in the as yet unnamed ACAC derby.
Yeah, excited to delve into it. And I think we should lead with the Calgary Wild this episode.
This is Maggie Doherty Howard, and you're listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
All right, Scott, the Calgary Wild played in Vancouver at Swangard Stadium on Saturday, late afternoon, early evening. I don't know. I'm not sure what to say. I guess we'll start with the result. It was a 6-0 victory for the Rise.
Yeah, this was, I think, an example of the dam just breaking, right? We saw Vancouver score fairly early into the game, and not long after, it's like the floodgates just opened, and the Rise just overwhelmed Calgary and claimed this one very easily. A lot of goals. Just a terrible night for the Calgary Wild. You know, we talked last week in our last episode about how Calgary always seems to play quite well against Vancouver, and these games between the two are always close. But we also talked about how Vancouver was the most informed team in the Northern Super League, and it was going to be really tough to take them on at home. You know, this was a team that had been on an 8-game unbeaten run. You know, it was night and day, this game versus the Calgary Wild's previous games against Vancouver. It was just a brutal outing for them.
You know, we kind of had a ray of hope there a little while back where the Wild, they strung a couple good games together and they started to look really good. But these last 3 matches have been really, really bad. They've been outscored 10-0. They haven't scored a goal in 301 minutes. Defensive errors, goalkeeping errors, no real significant scoring chances. Nothing is going right for them right now.
Absolutely. And this game, it really all came to a head. I think that cracks were showing in those 2 last games. For that, like you said, they were on a pretty decent run of form for a couple of games, but this game seemed to just expose everything that the Wild hasn't been good at this year. And, you know, we've talked about how Stephanie Vukovic has really, you know, kept the scorelines from getting out of control in some of these other losses that the Wild have had when they lost to, say, Montreal a few weekends ago, for instance. And I think their last game against Toronto as well. But this is a game where Steph Vukovic, the first goal scored was, I think, just an error on her part. And I think it probably just got into her head. And from that point forward, it seemed like she wasn't saving shots that she would have previously saved. And it was just a bad night for her. And she didn't get any help from her defense, that's for sure. So, yeah, 6-0 win for Vancouver. Tanks Calgary's goal differential. I think they're now at a -17, and it pretty much ends their playoff hopes, although not mathematically, but it would be quite the upset if they were to manage to scrape their way up into 4th place 6 games from now.
Yeah, they're 9 points behind Montreal and Ottawa right now. All those teams have 6 games left, and Montreal and Ottawa have 29 points, and Calgary has 20. So even if Calgary won 3 of the next 6 games, if any of those teams got a result, that still wouldn't be enough. So realistically speaking, I think the only way they could make the playoffs probably is if they won 5 of the 6 remaining games. And I don't see that happening right now with the way this team is playing, unfortunately.
No, unfortunately. And you, Jason, I really have to give kudos to you for doing a really deep dive on the team. You've compiled, I think, 3 or 4 pages of analysis here, so I think we should definitely dive into that, starting with the offensive troubles that we have highlighted before. But as you mentioned, more than 300 minutes without a goal, less than a goal per game on average, and you know they've only scored 17 goals in their 19 games, but as you pointed out here, 8 of those 17 goals have come against Halifax, who are the only team below them in the table, and a team that has a goal differential of -21 and only 3 wins out of their 18 games played this season. So while the Wild typically, they are a better team than Halifax, I think every team above them in the standings has, they may have been neck and neck with them at the beginning of the season, but it is a case where it seems like other teams have gotten better and the Wild just haven't been able to have substantive improvement, unfortunately.
I definitely want to touch on the idea of the team not getting better, but this inability to generate offense. What I basically did, and I can figure out a way to share this on social media, maybe on Substack or something, but I went through the NWSL teams from 2023, 2024, and to date, 2025. I also picked the USL Super League from last year, and then the NSL from this year, and I calculated out goals per game. When you look at this chart, they average 0.89 goals per game, which out of all of those team seasons is 49th of 55. And if you take out, again, I realize Halifax is a team in the league and you shouldn't not count them, I guess, but if you take out those games, they're 0.6 goals a game. So when you look at these numbers and when you look at, what it takes to make the playoffs, you need well over a goal a game to make the playoffs. It's basically impossible for a team to make the playoffs based on these numbers under a goal a game. No team has done it in any of those leagues for the last several years, but even one goal a game isn't enough. You really need about probably between 1.2 and 1.3 goals a game to have a chance at a playoff position.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, 0.6 goals per game in games not against Halifax. So that would be 54th out of 55 of all those teams and all those years that you pulled in terms of offensive production. But unfortunately, the Wild's problems don't really end with their offense, because defensively, especially in the last couple of weeks, the wheels have really come off, because we did talk earlier when we did our midseason report card about how defending was kind of like a strength of the Wild, but it seems to have moved backwards, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this a lot, Scott, about sort of what's changed. And, at the beginning of the year, this group of defenders was doing a really good job. It seemed to be like a bit of a rock solid base to work around. But, I don't know, is it a matter of other teams have figured out how to crack the code defensively on them? Or is it the quality of the personnel? I don't know. But it just seems to me like something has happened, because for a while there, we said, well, their players are injured and what are you going to do? But, they've had players, return to action here and defensive struggles have just gotten worse.
There's not a ton of depth defensively, and they did make a signing or two to try and remedy that. But unfortunately, it really hasn't helped, because as you mentioned earlier on, like their last 3 games, they've conceded 10 goals. Yeah, I think it's a case of, when I watch these games, I notice that every team presses Calgary high up the pitch, because I think they know that the defenders are liable to cough up possession every now and then. And, you cough up the ball right outside of your 18-yard box, then it's just very easy from there to produce a shot on goal or a shot. So it seems like other teams have clued in that Calgary does try to pass their way out the back. And unfortunately, they just can't seem to do that consistently. So that's one area where I think the defense has faltered. But yeah, there's also inability to clear their lines on set pieces is another area where I feel like we often see the Wild concede goals, is when they get a corner kick against, and even if they get to it first, they're unable to clear it out of danger, and in the second ball in, that's where the other team strikes. So yeah, and I think in this game we saw there was a lot of different kinds of goals that the Rise scored, and it just put all of those defensive issues on display.
My knowledge of tactics is limited, but when I look at roster composition, I feel a little more confident in talking about it. And the Wild have 8 import spots where they can bring in non-Canadian players, and they've used 5 of those 8 spots on players that are primarily there to keep the ball out of the net, either defenders or keeper. So I don't really know if you can make an argument right now that, using all of those valuable, import spots to, has really translated into, a strong defense.
Yeah, I guess 5 out of 8 import spots used for defenders or goalkeepers. Only 3 import spots used for offense, which also we could argue hasn't helped too much. But I do think of some of the import players are the most important players for the Wild. So,
well, Maggie Doherty-Howard, let's face it, like, she is the best player on this team. When you look at positives, she has been really good and has been basically a huge factor on this team in a positive way. But really beyond that, the import spots haven't really made too much of an impact. Callie Johnson, really good, but she's been injured. So
yeah, and the other positions, I think Michaela Moore and Mike Rolfsema, solid center back partnership at the beginning of the season, and then when we saw that they couldn't play together, the wheels came off. But now it seems even when they do play together, it hasn't been as cohesive as in the early weeks, and I'm not too sure why that is.
We have to talk about the offense. I really don't know, Scott. Like, they've brought in a bunch of players, that have had pretty significant goal scoring histories, and they haven't produced. Now, I don't know, like, is this a situation where they all lost their scoring touch, or they weren't that talented to start with, or is it something tactical that's preventing them from playing? I don't know, but they brought in a bunch of players who had pretty good reputation previously, but haven't scored.
Yeah, we've talked about, I think, the offensive puzzle before, right? How you have players like Christy Gray and Danielle Steer, who scored plenty of goals in previous teams they played for. But with the Wild, Christy Gray hasn't scored yet. Danielle Steer does have 1 goal, but that's not enough, right, for 2 offensive-minded players after 19 games into the season. And Sarita Thurton, she was one who I think caught her attention right away with her speed and her attacking threat. But for all the chances she's created over the last 19 games, only the 1 goal to speak for. So it is a puzzle, right? And we thought when Jorian Balcom and Catherine Harvey were brought in mid-season that they would really help with the offense. And while we have spoken, I think, quite positively of those 2 players and attributes that they have, it's still a bit telling that the 2 have only produced 1 goal between them in their, half dozen games or so. A little bit of a head scratcher as to why the Wild haven't been able to put the ball in the back of the net.
Hello, Fraser Aird here, guys, and you are listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
So, Jason, I wish we're going to segue and talk about Cavalry now, and I wish we had more positive things to say. And while Cavalry's performance against York was not nearly as calamitous as the Wild's was against Vancouver, they also had a really bad night out in Ontario, losing to York United 3-1. So when they came off of that, tremendous game against Forge, they won 4-1. I said that I think every Cavalry player had a good game in that performance. And then in this game, I think it was kind of the opposite, where I bet every player on Cavalry at the end of that game went into the dressing room upset with their own performance. I don't think anybody, maybe Gauthier Natigny, I thought he had some good moments, but I don't think anybody on Cavalry went into that game thinking, well, the team sucked, but at least I played well. I think it was a case where everybody had a bad day at the office. And York, to give them credit, I think they played really well. They produced 3 excellent goals, and they employed a really good high press, especially in the early parts of the second half, which turned the game in their favor, in my opinion. I looked at the stats, and not too surprisingly, Cavalry outshot York, and they outpossessed them considerably. But York were clinical, and their goals were great, right? I think a couple of them were our goal of the month candidates. So they had a great day at the office, and Cavalry had a bad day at the office. And I think 3-1 was probably a fair result.
And the other thing I want to mention about York is that their defending was really stalwart. Like, there were opportunities where, Cavalry had chances. Baldissimo had a couple shots, and one was a great save by the keeper. I think the other one was blocked by a defender, but they did a really good job team defending. The keeper came up big once or twice. It all seemed to work out for them, and they had a solid game, and deserved to win.
Absolutely. And defensively they look great. And goalkeeping, I think Urtiaga, he seems to always play well against Cavalry, right? He had some really great saves against them in previous games. And yeah, you're right. I think both of those Baldissimo shots were going to go in, but for the efforts of York's goalkeeper and back line. And yeah, they did a good job to neutralize Toby Warshevsky in particular. I noticed he was getting really frustrated with his lack of touches, and he was drifting all the way out to the touch line just so that he could, touch the ball every 5 or 10 minutes. But they made him look completely invisible for large parts of the game, and same with some of Cavalry's other attack-minded players. And they obviously, their one goal came late in the game from a Fraser Aird penalty kick, and I do think that was a penalty, like the foul, I mean.
Mhm.
But overall, I mean, yeah, Cavalry, complete opposite of their game against Forge the weekend before, where they were just ruthless and just constantly going at the defense. But today, that the game against York, it was just a little bit of a letdown after such a high and after a 4-game unbeaten run. For it to end that way was definitely disappointing.
Yeah, and now the Cavs are really in a 3-way dogfight for 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Halifax lost this weekend, but York's win, Cavalry's loss. Cavalry's got 33 points, and Halifax and York have 32. So it could be any combination of those 3 teams at this point. Nobody has any games in hand. It's just everybody's got 6 games left.
Yeah, 6 games left. And Cavalry has, they have to play, I think, Ottawa away again, as well as Forge at home again. So some really tough games for them coming up.
Hi, this is Ben Peppel, and you're listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
Okay, Scott, let's talk post-secondary action, and probably a good place to start would be the Crowchild Classic, men's edition on Saturday afternoon at McMahon.
Yeah, this was a bit of a surprise. Hey, I thought this was going to be a close match, but Mount Royal really made a statement. Cougars won 4-0 over the Dinos. Chandan Chanda scoring his 2nd brace of the season in his freshman campaign. And then Josh Flaxman and Tim Beckadal scoring the other 2 goals for MRU.
Yeah, I wish I had more insight into the details of this match, but that is a pretty substantial victory. And I think in the coaches' polls and in the rankings and so forth, these teams have been considered to be pretty close. This match, where they could actually face off against each other, it wasn't close. So I know they'll get a chance to play each other again, I think, later on in the season. But yeah, the big statement victory for the Cougars, and they're in first place in the Prairie Division right now.
Yeah, what rebuild? Okay, like despite the big names they've lost and the fact that so many of their recruits are new to USports and to Canada even. Cougars are looking great at the moment. The only unbeaten team in the Prairie Division. They've got 4 wins, a draw, no losses. Dinos are actually still doing pretty well in 2nd place at the moment with 3 wins and 2 losses. And it looks like an interesting race is heating up for the scoring award.
Canada West Golden Boot right now, it's a tie between 2 Calgary players. 5 goals each for Owen Antoniuk and Chandan Chanda, 2 former Cavs.
So they've really showcased the fact that they have this professional experience. And Antoniuk, though, it's interesting. I think he hasn't scored since that opening weekend when he had that emphatic 4-goal performance and then a goal in the second game as well. So he has not scored for 2 weekends now.
All right, and let's talk about the women's division. And I gotta do a mea culpa here. I definitely screwed up the research in the last episode. I said that the Dinos and Cougars were heading up to Edmonton, and I was wrong. Both those sets of matches were played here in town, so I didn't realize that until right before the Dinos match was happening on Saturday morning. So yeah, anyway, but I guess be that as it may, I did have the matchups right, and we have some results.
Yeah, in the what we like to call the Diogo Derby, Dinos women won 1-0 against MacEwan University Griffins. We call it that because, of course, Diogo Raposo, Dinos head coach, was previously MacEwan's head coach before he made the move to Calgary. Addie White scored the lone goal in that one. And then on the other side of Crowchild Trail, MRU Cougars were taking on Alberta Pandas, and that was a 1-1 draw with Julia Makalovsky scoring MRU's goal.
And then on Sunday, they switched dance partners, and the Dinos were playing the Pandas. Another victory for the Dinos, this time 4-1. 2 goals from Sarah Donnick. Brooklyn Colvin got one, and Brooke Batty got one as well.
Yeah, and I believe would that put Brooke Batty at 7 goals on the season?
I think that sounds right, yeah.
Cougars playing McEwen. They had a 2-0 win with goals coming from Isabella Chirico and Danny Juarez.
Similarly to the men's division, the 2 Calgary universities are at the top of the Prairie division. On the women's side, difference is, though, the Dinos are in first with a 4-0 record, and then the Cougars are in second with a 3-0-1 record.
Yeah, 3 wins and a draw. So great start by Calgary-based teams, and honestly, apart from that 4-0 loss for the University of Calgary Dinos men's, another great weekend for Calgary's local university team.
And really, it carried on to the ACAC as well in regards to the SAIT Trojans. They had a few emphatic victories over the weekend.
Yeah, no surprise with the SAIT Trojans women's team's season opener against Augustana. They won this one 11-0. That's the kind of scoreline new listeners should probably get used to. They're tuning in and haven't heard us talk about the SAIT Trojans in the past 2 years. But goals, Megan Weeb scored 4, Sage Joseph scored 2, and then the other goals came from Nikki Charlton, Rachel O'Leary, Amy Fallows, Gabby Kavetsa, and Megan Hockley. And then they followed it up on Sunday in the derby match against Ambrose University. SAIT won 6-1 with goals coming from Megan Weeb, Sophia Spruill, Rachel O'Leary, who grabbed a brace, Nicole Noble, and Ashlyn Grant.
Yeah, so I don't know. I guess really we shouldn't be surprised by seeing scores like this. Like you said, it seems to be par for the course for the SAIT women's team, but all signs point to them being just as dominant as they've been the last several years. They've got so much experience on that team, and you got to think that, they've got a pretty good shot of going far this year.
They always challenge for nationals, I think. And in terms of the South Division, they really have no competition. I think last year they had a couple of good games against Lethbridge College, or Lethbridge Polytechnic as they're now called. But overall, SAIT seems to walk through their regular season. But we also saw a really impressive showing from the men's team on Sunday. Their season opener, their derby match against Ambrose, is finished in a 6-1 win for SAIT, with Robert Woodruff Brown scoring a hat trick, carrying forward his good form from the League One season, and then Finn Hanna, Estrom Johannes, and Amadeo Chamoun also scoring. So, Jason, considering the Trojans' perennial dominance in the ACAC, at least in the regular season, because they don't always, win the conference championship at the end of the playoffs, but you and I have spoken briefly, hypothetically, what would happen if SAIT joined USports? And I think it's, considering Mount Royal was at one point a college, they joined USports maybe a decade ago. Potentially, could SAIT soccer at least potentially compete in USports one day?
I think the answer right now to this is that they can't. And the reason has nothing to do with on the field, on the pitch, on the ice. I think USports has a rule saying that, your school has to have a certain amount of university level degree programs being in the mix. And I don't think SAIT, at least at this point in time, comes close to that number. So, Ontario Tech, which I'm not familiar with Ontario Tech, but I think they're probably a bit closer to what SAIT is overall. They're playing in USports. But I think there are some restrictions that actually, like I said, have nothing to do with being on the pitch. But, I don't know if you remember this, Scott, but at one point, and this is probably, it was before the pandemic, people involved with the SAIT Trojans program that were looking at joining the NCAA.
I didn't know about that.
It didn't go anywhere. But, I think that the costs and, even just the fact that, Simon Fraser's results in NCAA have been sort of mixed, but they actually probably would qualify as an NCAA school as opposed to a USports school. So I think that seems like a real stretch. There would just have to be piles of money poured into those programs in order to be involved. And then the other thing is even, what division would they play and what conference would take them? That's a problem Simon Fraser has always had, but that would be an easier admission from meeting the qualifications of the NCAA as opposed to meeting the qualifications of USports.
Well, I think that would be awesome. Hey, wouldn't that be, I think, better if SAIT could play against MRU and Dinos, and like there could even be some kind of a separate thing where, you know how they have in MLS, they have the Cascadia Cup where they tally up all the games between Portland, Vancouver, and Seattle, and whoever gets the most points from their respective games against each other gets like a trophy every year.
Mm-hmm.
You know about that?
Yeah.
Like if they had that in USports between the 3 Calgary teams, I would love that.
Wouldn't it be great if there could be some kind of like mini tournament between those 3 teams every year, where maybe on middle of the week, like on a Wednesday night, they would all play each other home and home, and then the winner would get some trophy. I realize that would be a real stretch, because what's the incentive and motivation to do that? But it would be really cool.
Yeah, and the season is already so condensed, and no one would, I think, be that interested in it other than people like us.
Well,
but it would be cool, wouldn't it? Like you got the Can Champ, and then you got like the Calgary Cup.
Well, it would be cool, but at the end of the day, there would have to be some compelling reason to do it, and the only compelling reason I could think of would be money. And where would the financial backing to be that there would be somehow dollars in some way, shape, or form associated with this to make it happen? Because it wouldn't just be for the glory of a trophy; it would have to be some other reason that would compel these teams to play each other. Yeah, I can't imagine what that would be.
Anyway, I don't know. Good conversation, good discussion prompt.
Thank you for listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can have this podcast downloaded to your device as soon as it becomes available by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other platforms. Check out our website at yycsoccer.com, where you can look through our episode archive and find other options to listen, including our YouTube channel. We also have links there so you can buy Scott's book. It's all about the history of pro soccer in Calgary, and it's called Here Come the Cavalry. You can leave a question or comment in the Contact Us section of our website. You can also interact with us on social media such as Twitter or Instagram or Blue Sky, where our username is YYC Soccer 403. Thanks for listening.